I'm Kara Sundlin. It's the time of year where we are going to be doing holiday gatherings, and of course we can anticipate sometimes uncomfortable table talk with our relatives, especially about politics. At the time of this taping, it's a day after Election Day. So joining us with ways we can really navigate those hard moments is psychologist Dr. Laura Saunders with the Institute of Living. I love that we're bringing a psychologist in because sometimes we do feel like we have to psych everyone out at the dinner table. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Kara. And it's not necessarily about psyching everyone out. It's about having a good plan to preserve one's own mental health.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's so much what with the show is how do we be well? And I think a lot of us, this is normal, right? If you have angst about the holidays and certain relatives.
It's really very typical. I would say all families have individuals with different ideas and different opinions and different styles. And sometimes a different grasp of the truth and the facts. And in so many situations, we want to bring people together around the holidays. We want to connect. If you haven't been connecting for the however many months, I think we're really moving away from some of the intensity of COVID where, remember we had like two seasons where we couldn't get together at all, or we weren't supposed to get together. So we want to bring people together. We want connection. We want to reduce social isolation, but we really don't need the angst and the intensity of a lot of very politicized conversations.
So we're coming off Election Day. How do we navigate the minefield of politics over the holidays?
It's acknowledging that it's easy to spin out of control. It's having some tips or a plan of action, right? So the first thing that I like to emphasize is setting a boundary ahead of time. Know what your own limits are around politics. Know what the limits are of some of the people around you, family and friends. Really, for some, it's just making a declaration that there's no political discussions around the holidays or around dinner or holiday gatherings. We certainly don't want any name calling or any destructive communication. So sometimes communicating those boundaries in advance can be very, very helpful.
Okay. So when you say communicate those boundaries in advance, I host Thanksgiving a lot of times. If we wanted to set that, how do we do that? Because I think people just go, they have a lot of angst and they just go, I hope nothing happens. And that's, you're saying really we should be proactive. So what does it look like to communicate a boundary?
Right. And that's kind of a situation, as I've had said to me, hope is not a strategy.
Okay.
So we need to have a strategy. And sometimes that strategy is, when you're reaching out via text or email or phone call to invite someone to your house and saying, listen, we are dialing back any intense or politicized conversations. So, bring your best funny anecdote, but we're leaving any political differences outside the door, right? So it's planning in advance, communicating what you need in a particular situation or what you're hoping for or expecting. So whether you're the host or whether you are someone that's being invited and you're the person that's being said to, listen, dial back some of the political rhetoric or some of the negative comments and take heed of that.
Yeah, yeah. And you say we should stay away from black and white, always, never, extreme words. Generally, I mean, I say this to my kids. Sometimes if you're saying always or never, you're probably wrong.
Yes. And, woulds and shoulds are also good to stay away from. But a lot of individuals in these politicized conversations really engage in what we call all or nothing or black and white thinking, right? This group is all right and this group is all wrong. When obviously it's really much more of a blend of those things, right? There's people over here that have some good ideas. There's people on this side that have some good ideas. If we could all just combine everyone's good ideas together, it'd be a much better place to live. But what happens oftentimes is people engage in very black and white thinking and, or they are more cognitively rigid or inflexible in how they see the world. And so they spew that cognitive inflexibility around on other people.
So the The preparation is really important, right? You say you want us to like think, where would our triggers be and what's my exit strategy? Like actually envision yourself maybe taking a walk and coming back calm down so you're not engaging.
Yes. And again, planning in advance, setting a boundary ahead of time, plan ahead for the drama. If you really feel like, you're someone who gets easily triggered by either people talking about politics, there's not even politics right now. I mean, there's a lot of world politics that are going on that people can certainly take sides on. A lot of big time political issues around the world. And so it's okay for people to have different points of view. I think what gets concerning is when you insist on someone else taking on your point of view or agreeing with you. It's in those situations, if you're someone that gets easily triggered by rhetoric or loud voices, you need to have either an exit strategy, or you take some space, or you go for a walk, or you go in another room and take some deep breaths. You just need to have a plan.
Yeah. Well, and it can be overstimulating for folks. You're around people you haven't seen, and sometimes you really want to see maybe mom and dad, but there's one sibling that you always tend to fight. So what's the best way to handle it if you know there's just kind of one person that really might be the person to cause the problem?
It could be just keeping your distance from that person, right? So if you know that person tends to say things that can be triggering, it's keeping some space. I think the elephant in the room in some of these situations is once alcohol or substances are involved, any rational thought and reasoning that you entered into a situation with often goes out the window. So once you start taking in alcohol, your ability to control your impulses or respond in an overly negative way can really go out the window. And I'm not saying that, all events, all family and holiday gatherings need to be dry events, but it's just being mindful that if you're someone that's easily triggered and you're, having a few drinks, know that you're more likely to get triggered by a situation or by someone's inflammatory rhetoric, and to just be more mindful and aware of that.
Right, which is different than most people would think. I think some people think like, ugh, I gotta better have a glass of wine. We're going to the holidays. So, in fact, you need to realize that, maybe one glass of wine is okay, but much more, you might actually be triggered more. What about the person you say, there's always that person who throws the fireball, who's kind of hoping to get a reaction?
Yeah, we all know those people, right? We have them in our family. We all know them, in our friend group. Right, I do call it a fireball. So that they're throwing a fireball, hoping that poof, someone catches fire and kind of gets emotionally lit up, and then engages in that dynamic. And knowing if you're someone that is easily triggered, knowing who the person is that tends to throw that fireball, again, avoiding people, taking space, being mindful of your alcohol use, because then your impulse control decreases and your ability to respond rationally and logically decreases. Also, your ability to set a boundary and protect yourself can be impaired. So be mindful of those people. We all know them, who tend to throw the fireballs and really want to emotionally light up a situation.
Now, we're sitting across the couch from you. I'm very open on this show. I've been to therapy. I love therapy. I love learning these things. Not everyone at the table is going to be as into that, or, this is the way it is, or whatever. So when you're setting boundaries, is that more of a private activity? Or you're not going to necessarily go and tell everyone, well, I set a boundary that I'm not doing this and you're not doing that. Like, that's not really effective, right? It's more, these are internal things we're doing.
I think it can be both. It's certainly an internal process, because in any situation, what you want to gauge is what you do and do not have control over, right? I do not have control over anyone else. I try to have control over myself, my own reactions, or my own verbalizations or expressed emotions. I try to have control over that. So setting a boundary might be, I'm going to remove myself from a situation. Sometimes setting a boundary might be asking another family member or a friend or the host to say, listen, you know that Uncle Johnny always says inflammatory things and definitely sets me off, and I think sets other people off. Can you just make a comment to him and just give him some advance warning not to do that? And again, the host might do that, or another family member might do that for you, but you still have no control over whether or not that person does throw those inflammatory or fireball-like comments. All you have control over is then maintaining your own sense of either respect or setting that emotional boundary for yourself if something does get lit up in the situation.
So if you're the host, it might be saying, hey guys, we know we're very polarized, no politics, and then offering other things. You mentioned your sister puts little positive talkers underneath the plate. So you give something else to do other than focus on these controversial topics.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. My sister will put a Seinfeld quote or scene or something, some kind of a funny little movie clip put them on a little piece of paper under the plate, and they might be, she asks, try to weave that into a conversation. So it's just a fun way to have an activity that is naturally meant to be kind of lighthearted. Bringing humor into situations is always helpful. And I'm not necessarily talking about sarcasm, because sarcasm often has a kernel of either truth or a negative edge to it, because sarcasm can be easily misinterpreted by people.
Yeah.
But certainly bringing humor into situations is always helpful.
Yeah, so that's one way of dealing with it. Now, if you have those people, and there's a lot going on right now. We have the war in Israel that's polarizing people. We have just upcoming presidential elections. I mean, we're really polarized.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have those people who, no matter what, maybe they're going to ignore the host request that we not do this, and they get really, they're just so almost like on a mission to tell you the right way, or you think, I'm going to just engage in a civilized conversation of back and forth. There are those people who are super rigid, maybe even might have a personality disorder, who are never going to agree with you no matter what, right? Or never even acknowledge that you might have a point.
There are those people. They're in every friend group. They're in most every family. There are those individuals that are so kind of hell-bent and cognitively rigid, a little bit authoritarian, and intolerant in their points of view. And even if the host or another friend has asked them not to make inflammatory comments, they're still looking to create some emotional arousal, right, where everyone's emotions get amped up. So in those situations, you can say, I always have a few set or standard phrases, because the reality is when you're most upset, you don't think as clearly and you can't say the things that you necessarily want to say. Often people walk away from those situations and they're like, oh, I should have said A or B or C. But have some set statements for yourself, like, I'm choosing not to engage in that debate at this time, or I have a different point of view. I'm just choosing not to engage in this conversation, right? So that's a way to sort of set a boundary for yourself or plan ahead for the drama, and then literally exit. It could be like, I need to go help the host clean up, or excuse me, I need to go to the bathroom, or I'm taking a walk outside, right? So it's doing something to care for yourself. In those situations is acknowledging that you are not going to change that individual's point of view. So engaging in a heated debate only serves to fuel their inflammatory talk and makes you feel more either triggered or upset or ineffective or out of control.
Yeah, and there's a lot right now on social media, which I know you've got your opinions about. There's a lot where people are starting to learn about narcissistic personality disorder or things like that. How do you know if you're dealing with someone who really is a narcissist like that?
So, it's not even so much about, diagnosing someone as narcissistic, because the important thing to remember, if we're going to talk about narcissistic personalities, is the core of narcissism actually is insecurity. So these individuals come off as hot and heavy, black and white, all or nothing thinking. really not considering the thoughts, ideas, or opinions of other people, only concerned about their own welfare and well-being. But as I said, their core is that they're insecure, and they come up with this overly dramatic response as a way to mask or hide that inner security, right? That's always like the kernel that I like to tell people or have in my own mind when I meet people like this. It's like, you're hiding your own insecurities. So having that sort of internal dialogue can be helpful, but I will guarantee for you, in a lot of these situations, you are not going to change the mind of that overly narcissistic or overly cognitively rigid person, cognitively inflexible person. You will not be changing their mind. So to engage in a heated debate only serves to make you feel more upset or ineffective or triggered.
Right. And it's probably not a good idea, as tempting as it might be, for you to be triggered and say, well, you're a narcissist, or you're this, or I saw Dr. Saunders, and because you do this, that, and that, you're wrong. Like, this is a time where we just actually want to be more kind than right, really, to ourselves. Like, we're just trying to self-preserve.
Yeah, and right, no one, anytime you make you statements like you're this and you're that, and your opinion is this and your opinion is that, all it's going to serve to do is make the other person get defensive and hold their position even stronger. So it is honestly, it's about an I statement. Like, I disagree, but I'm not engaging this debate right now, or I'm choosing not to debate you on this topic. I'm going to take some space, or I have a different opinion, right? Again, some of those set or standard phrases of ways for you to manage an overly negative or heated situation that where you can protect yourself and then exit a situation so that you don't have to put yourself in a context or situation where you feel someone could be like almost verbally abusive or verbally assaultive to you.
So this is a big question. I think sometimes people just automatically, we have a lot of shoulds, right? Well, I should see my family for Thanksgiving. I should see my family for Christmas. And if you know that it's just really not an enjoyable experience, or you kind of feel awful for days after, what's the guidance on opting out and say, I'm just not coming this year?
There is the option to set that boundary and say, yes, I'm not going to attend this family function. Sometimes I think what's helpful is not necessarily to completely isolate yourself and remove yourself from a situation, but to say, to a particular person that you may get along with, whether it's in your family or an extended friend group, to say, listen, can we have lunch one-on-one, or can we do something different one-on-one? That maybe managing a larger situation is more difficult for you, but you don't want to completely remove yourself and just be isolated, but to target one or two people where you do want to maintain a relationship, or you do want to maintain a connection, and keep that going, to make that effort and separate it out, but maybe you can't do the whole big gathering.
Yeah. So just as we want to review to people, setting a boundary ahead of time is huge. So that's one of your big points, is just know your own limits and doing that ahead of time. And that might even be like in your own head, like you don't have to tell the host, you don't have to tell grandma, who might be all upset, but knowing that I'm only going to go for 90 minutes. I'm just going to go, and as soon as dinner's over, I'm going to leave. That might be your internal boundary that makes you feel better. Also, trying to stay away from those black and white people, and balancing your self-respect with the goal of keeping the relationship and planning ahead for the drama. Those are your top 4. But when you say balancing self-respect with keeping the relationship, that's what why a lot of families don't become estranged, right? Because you're like, okay, this isn't healthy, and I get that there's a dysfunctional dynamic, but I just want my brother or my mother or whoever in my life more than I want to be estranged, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it is striking that kind of balance. I mean, there might be, overall more good things about this connection than there are negative things. And in any relationship or in any connection, once the negative aspects of the relationship or connection outweigh the positive, then that's time to maybe do something different. But when, again, I don't want individuals to engage in that black and white or all or nothing thinking. Just because your friend or relative has a different, political view, doesn't mean you have to cut them out of their life, cut them out of your life. It might be that you can enjoy the fact that, I want my kids and my nieces and nephews to have a relationship. So I'm going to work on tolerating some of these things because I have a bigger goal in mind, right? The boundary might be, as you said, in some of these situations, you know what, I'm just going to stay for an hour to an hour and a half, and give myself permission to leave. But if things are going well, I give myself permission to stay, right?
Mm.
And let things sort of play out. That at any point I can leave. So it's remembering what your goals are in a particular situation. If your goal is to work on a longer term relationship, you might sort of set some things aside. But for some people there are absolutes, and it just becomes intolerable for them to maintain that connection.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I like the idea of the bigger goal, because sometimes you are doing it just because, okay, I want my kids to have cousins. I've never gotten along with this person, and maybe it'll get better, maybe it won't, but I'm choosing to like make my mom happy, or I'm choosing to do this. So having those I statements, that's a really good thing. The other thing I was going to say is I learned, and I don't know if this is a real psychological term, but it popped into my mind that in one of those articles of like what you do with a controversial person that you generally fight with, and they call it sort of the gray rock technique, where you just like, anything is, the only thing you talk about is everything's okay, everything's fine, and the weather, the this. What do you do if you, for those times you have to see that person, what do you talk about so that you can stay away from the controversy?
Yeah, I mean, I always stay with pretty topical things. I mean, talking about kids is always a safe thing to talk about, and they could be children or adult children. Saying, it's actually sometimes the best strategy to make a connection is to ask someone else questions, right? It's to say, how's your job been going? Or how much are you enjoying retirement? Or I heard I saw you posted on Facebook that you went on a trip. Tell me about it, right? To ask questions to someone else, where you show some interest in their life or aspects of their life, is a great way to sort of maintain a connection, and to keep a conversation going.
Yeah, yeah. And as far as the kids, the idea is, I think about, if you're having controversy in your family, you're also teaching your kids how you want to behave. So how do you talk to your kids about that relative who's really difficult? You don't want to, maybe your kids not to like them, but Uncle so-and-so tends to be, let's say this relative talks about really inappropriate things, or tends to be, a little, maybe they're a little racist, or they're intolerant of other folks, and there's, how do you address that with the kids and be like, right, this is your uncle, I want you to show him respect, but he's a little this? Or how do we navigate that with the kids so that they don't,
Right.
because they're looking for cues from us?
Yeah, I think it's always there. I call it sort of the pre and the post conversation, right? The pre conversation is, yes, Uncle Sam, he sometimes says some ridiculous things. And so, none of us are going to respond to that. We're going to ignore it. And then after the event, you say, as predicted, Uncle Sam did say a few ridiculous things. Remember when he said A or B? So you saw that I really tried not to respond to that, or I set a limit and said, please don't talk like that in front of my kids, or, so you have sort of a pre and post conversation, hopefully to nullify any damage. But again, you want to be a role model in these situations, and not become so reactive, because the more reactive you are as the parent or the adult, it just gives the children to be an excuse to be reactive as well.
So by telling your kids not responding, that's a strategy. I think so many times people think by not responding, you're being weak, or you're not standing up for what's right. But in this setting, you're saying actually being kind, or being calm, or being non-confrontational is actually strength.
It is a strength, and again, it's part of that boundary, right? I'm not going to change his opinion. This is the way he's been, but I'm going to focus on what's helpful for me, or I'm going to focus on, managing my own sense of self, or managing my own integrity. So I'm going to remove myself from this situation, because I know that if I engage in this debate, it's not going to change his opinion.
And specifically, you spend a lot of time counseling people as a psychologist. Families are the one thing, no matter how evolved we are, right? It can be stressful. So the idea that it's supposed to look like the movies, that in of itself is wrong, right? Generally, most people go home to see the families, and those are the folks who can push our buttons, or maybe we're going to even feel more triggered, and that would be something to expect.
Yes, and one of our next segments in the next few weeks, Kara, is going to be, there are no Hallmark families.
Right.
There are none, right? They're only in the movies. It's in the movies where, there's a hot, warm breakfast that everyone sits down to before they go to school. I don't know too many families that have that, right? So there are no Hallmark families. All families have their, difficult individuals in the family. So we make decisions about what we can and cannot tolerate, how to focus on getting along, how to focus on forgiving if that's appropriate, and finding the best in people instead of always focusing on the worst.
And we have about final 2 minutes. The other thing that I think is stressful for those who have kids who are maybe neurodivergent, right? Or they're going in and their kids have ADHD or maybe autism or any, even if it's not a diagnosis, but your kids don't do well in this situation, and they get stressed out, or they might run around or not sit right. And families can be judgmental, but there's all like, don't tell grandma because she doesn't really understand. Is that the wrong way? Should we be telling our relatives ahead of time, like, Johnny's not probably going to sit. Please don't get mad at him. Or we're asking him to sit for maybe 5 minutes, and he might, he might be overwhelmed. Or what do we do in a situation where parents are feeling really judged?
I do think trying to be open in those situations is a way to reduce stigma, right? Stigma is the expectation of rejection. So to be open, to say, listen, yes, remember, Billy's on the autism spectrum, and he doesn't understand sarcasm, and he doesn't take teasing too well, and he can, he can only tolerate interactions, for short periods of time.
Okay.
Or, right, someone's a little bit more motorically restless, and, they can sit for the main course, but then they have to sort of take breaks, or, we know that they need some time outside to run around and burn off some energy. I deal with this a lot with a lot of LGBTQ young people. Do we tell the grandparents that they're, our child is transgender or their grandchild's transgender? I do like to give people the benefit of the doubt, okay, and to be open and honest as much as you can, or with as much information that feels comfortable to share, and then give people the opportunity to hopefully respond in a positive manner.
Dr. Laura Saunders, full of wisdom always as we go to the end of this show, but want to have everyone, you can follow me on social media at Kara Sundlin, where we like to share more information. Have a great holiday and be well. Thanks, doctor.
Thank you.